Now we're going to go on and learn how to describe a graph with a trend from the beginning to the end. Look at this bar chart. It shows the refreshment drink consumption in the UK from 1950 to 2000. And from the key, we can see that the drinks are coffee, soft drinks and tea. We begin any diagram in task 1 with an introduction. When there's a graph with a trend, this includes 5 pieces of information, and here they are here. What kind of graph it is. In other words, we begin. The line graph shows, indicates, remember the useful language page. 2 is the vertical axis, the information on the vertical axis. This could be the number of, the population of, the percentage of. Number 3, the question. We paraphrase the title or the question at the top of the page. In other words, try to use slightly different words from what it says. Number 4, we need the information on the horizontal axis. Normally that's time, for example, from 1950 to 2000, or from day 1 to day 6. And of course, we need the information in the key. So try and put all this information in your introduction. Let's look at an example together. Here's our bar chart again. So using all these 5 pieces of information, we can write this bar chart. The bar chart gives information about how many cups or glasses of coffee, tea and soft drinks were consumed in the United Kingdom between 1950 and 2000. Now you see how we have changed the information, or we've paraphrased as far as possible. We said here the bar chart gives information about how many. Instead of the number of cups or glasses, we said how many cups or glasses of. Instead of saying refreshment drink, we said coffee, soft drinks and tea were consumed, so we changed the form of the word, in the United Kingdom between 1950 and 2000. So that's the introduction. Now for the very famous elephant sentence. Now you may ask, what is the elephant sentence and why is this course called the Elephant Course? Well, if you imagine that there's a great big elephant standing next to me and somebody asked you, what's Dina's classroom like? You should say, well, there's a great big elephant in the middle of the room. Oh, and there's a whiteboard and there's some flowers and some desks and so on. But you should mention the elephant first because that's what stands out the most. And in task 1, the elephant is what stands out in your graph. The elephant could be the biggest changes or the highest bars or the highest numbers. Let's look at our bar chart again. What is the elephant in this graph? Isn't it these 2 drinks that had the biggest change in consumption over the period? Look at coffee. It rose sharply over the period. And look at tea. Well, that plunged, didn't it? Or fell sharply. So this would be our elephant sentence. Let's put it together using language from the useful language page. The first thing to note is that coffee consumption rose dramatically while tea consumption fell sharply. I didn't say anything about soft drink consumption because nothing much happened, did it? I wouldn't call that an elephant because it was low and it was stable over the whole period. So the elephant here is that coffee consumption rose dramatically while tea consumption fell sharply. Now let's put these together. The bar chart gives information about how many cups or glasses of coffee, tea and soft drinks were consumed in the United Kingdom between 1950 and 2000. And now for our elephant sentence. The first thing to note is that there was a significant increase in coffee consumption while tea consumption decreased substantially in the United Kingdom over the period under study. So you see how I've used language from the useful language page to introduce the elephant sentence, and I have changed the way I talk about time. Now we must go on to give details, using all the data to back up what we said. This is very important because if we leave out any data, we cannot get over a 5 for task achievement in writing task 1. So we begin with more specifically. And we have to take each of these drinks separately and describe how many cups were drunk of each over the period. In other words, we must try and summarize the information. Now, I'm going to start with giving details about coffee consumption because that is what I mentioned first in the elephant sentence, and that is what had the biggest change. Look at this. More specifically, in 1950, 10 cups of coffee were drunk. So I'm here in 1950, 10 cups of coffee were drunk. And then look what happens. 50 years later, this figure rose dramatically to just over 50. So you can see I went from 1950 to 2000, and I didn't stop in 1975 because I'm summarizing. And this is a continual upward trend, so I'm only interested in the beginning and the end of the period. And I said this figure, so I used referencing, so I avoid repeating all these words. And you can see all of these words are again on your useful language page. So now I've finished talking about coffee, I have to talk about tea. Now, why do I talk about tea and not soft drinks? Well, remember, tea had the second biggest change. I'm going to leave soft drinks till last because, as I said, nothing much happened. So I begin with a linking word, in contrast. Why do I use in contrast? Well, I use in contrast because now it's a downward trend. In other words, the trend is opposite to the trend for coffee. So look how I describe tea consumption. In contrast, tea consumption stood at 50 at the beginning of the period and followed a sharp downward trend to 10 by 2000. So look how I have changed my vocabulary. I used stood at this time, which is nice, excuse me, for giving details. And again, I changed the way I talk about time by 2000. So now I've talked about coffee, tea. So I go on now to talk about soft drinks. I cannot leave any of the drinks out. Even if they are insignificant, I must still talk about them. So let's describe what happened with soft drinks. As regards soft drinks, consumption remained relatively constant at around 10 glasses throughout the whole period. So again, I use as regards now from my language bank, remained relatively constant. And I say relatively because if you notice here in 1975, there was a very slight rise. So if I say relatively, I'm covered, aren't I? At around 10 glasses. So again, I put the number of glasses throughout the whole period. So again, I talk about the period differently using throughout the whole period. So this is my main body. You can see I have 3 paragraphs describing everything in the graph. They're separated logically into paragraphs. They're linked together using linking words to show the difference in the trend. And I've also used lots of different ways of talking about time. So I show a range of vocabulary and I don't repeat the same words. Now for the conclusion. In the conclusion, we restate the main points or the trends, or if there's anything different that we noticed, we can put that in the conclusion. Look how we begin. From the given data, it is obvious that coffee consumption became more popular while tea was consumed less in the United Kingdom over the aforementioned period. So you see, we have summarized what happened. At the beginning, tea was more popular, but at the end, coffee became more popular. And again, look how we talk about the period over the aforementioned period. And remember, all of this vocabulary is on your useful language page. So this is the complete summary of the bar chart we just described. It's a good idea to memorize this, or at least learn it really well, because it follows the structure that the examiner is looking for in the IELTS test. The introduction, the elephant sentence, the main body with all the data or all the details, and a conclusion to finish everything off. Now you can go on to practice yourself.